Hi, I'm Dr. Rashawn Ray. This is my daily thought. What does it mean to be black and travel? Traveling while black. Well, unfortunately, traveling can be a tumultuous, stressful, and discriminatory experience. Traveling while black oftentimes isn't enjoyable. It's worrisome. So while I'm sitting here listening to the birds chirping, the sun rising, instead, I'm thinking about all of the things that I have to do to think about what it means to start traveling. You see, traveling while black is something that links black people. It's something that Dr. Michael Dawson talks about in Linked Fate. It's something that links people across social class, across generations. So the experiences that my granddad tells me from the 50s and 60s when he was in the military, traveling to different military bases, and the fact that people wouldn't serve him is also something that I can share about places I've been where people actually haven't served me in the 21st century, or where I've been pulled over or stopped and these sort of things. And so what becomes interesting about it is that some people think that it might be about a vehicle, right? That, okay, if you're driving a Cutlass like Philando Castile or something like that, that's different. Well, I think you can ask Johnny Cochran what happened when he drove his luxury vehicle. So these sort of things continue to happen. And, it's interesting because I've had to actually bail out and drive home professors who have been stopped, oftentimes unlawfully, and taken to jail for minor offenses that people have tried to get them hung up on. And so what's interesting is that what people don't really realize is the process that black people go through when we travel, right? So not only is it looking up in Google Maps and doing a map and figuring out where we go, it's also mapping out where we're going to stop, right? Where we're potentially going to eat, what gas stations are friendly, right? So when you're heading west, Love's gas stations are oftentimes friendly, right? So that's just seeing that heart makes things friendly. But stopping at some obscure exit that has one gas station oftentimes doesn't become what we do. We also have to time out our travel. We don't necessarily want to travel at times, so we're going to be traveling at night through certain places called sundown towns, because in many respects, this is what this is about. Sundown towns are towns where black people at night don't need to be around, right? And they're all over the country. I mean, Martinsville, Indiana, that I would drive through from Bloomington to Indianapolis, is one of the most notorious ones. I mean, I've had several experiences there. One in particular, I'm going to church. We are suited and booted, Dr. Keon Gilbert and I. This is the whole reason, the whole impetus, actually, this experience behind Why Police Kill Black Males with Impunity, the paper that came out, the article that came out earlier this year in Journal of Urban Health. And what's interesting in that respect is that we're driving, it's a 2-lane street, and actually a 2-lane highway, and a police officer is driving in the slow lane. So we're in the faster lane. Speed limit was 45. We're going 40. And we pass him because he was going about 30 or 35. We thought maybe he was looking for something. In short, after we passed him about a mile later, he starts following us for about the next 3 miles. Probably, I assume, running the tags, and then probably figuring out is nothing going on. So he comes across the loudspeaker in his police vehicle. We are on the highway now, and says, "Don't you ever pass me again." We were like, what is that? And so this is happening while we are riding down the highway, that a police officer comes across and says, "Don't ever pass me again." And he pulls up beside us, kind of points at us, and then speeds off. And we're like, this is crazy, right? But see, this isn't even the most traumatic type of experiences that I could talk about, right? Because the thing when we travel, there are other things we also have to do. We oftentimes take main roads, right? So a quicker way that might be shorter, we're not normally taking that, right? We also check the demographics of the places where we're going, trying to figure out what are we actually getting ourselves into. And at all costs, we try to avoid these sundown towns and think about whether or not people have actually been to these places before. And part of it is trying to signal in some way that we have the right to be traveling, we have the right to be here. So Brandon Taylor, who was one of just the nicest people I've ever met, right? I mean, he works in donor relations at Meharry Medical School in Nashville currently, but he's previously worked for St. Jude Children's Hospital. He's all about raising money, raising awareness, trying to help people get healthy, try to help people live great lives. I mean, he's just a great person. And he was traveling around with St. Jude trying to raise some money in Arkansas. And he's in a suit. He had been to have a meeting, and he had a rental car, and he got pulled over because one of the tail lights wasn't working. right? And so that makes sense for an officer to tell people that their tail lights are out, right? But since it was a rental car, I guess the documentation that the officer provided wasn't good enough, or that Brandon provided wasn't good enough for the officer. And so Brandon goes, "Sir, I'm traveling for work. You know, I work for St. Jude. I mean, you see how I'm dressed. I'm professional." And that actually made the interaction more contentious. The officer actually got upset about that. It was like, I don't care about any of that. I don't care who you are or what you have, right? And so it turned into a very big deal when he was in a rental car for work. So these are the sort of experiences that we actually have. And this brings up another point. See, politics and respectability only take us so far, right? I mean, so we act like that politics and respectability and accommodation is politics. How we dress, how we walk the part, how we look the part matters. But see, the one thing that politics and respectability can't do, we can't act away our blackness in that moment. And our blackness is what's doing it. So our suits actually don't stop these interactions. Our vehicles don't stop these interactions. Instead, they might actually worsen these interactions, right? And so the key comparison when black people choose to dress up and say, I'm going to show them that I'm respectable. See, that's not the correct comparison you need to be making. In that moment, you're making a comparison between yourself and other black people, trying to separate yourself between yourself and other black people. And the black people who pick up my trash, I have more similar experiences to them than some of the people who I work with every day, right? And so because we're not dressed the part all the time. And last time I checked, MLK got assassinated in a suit, right? So people trying to engage in politics of respectability, your comparison is off. Your comparison should be the white people who you work with, right? And until our experiences are equivalent to that, then we are continuously, unconditionally free. I'll give you a couple of other examples I've had. I was with Professor Alden Morris, who is a distinguished university professor at Northwestern University, one of the most prolific scholars on race and social movements that we've ever had. Had a book on the civil rights movement in the 80s, had a recent book come out on the legendary status of W.B. Du Bois as a scholar denied. And we were, I believe, in Stony Brook in New York, because it's very important to make sure people realize that this isn't just about the South, right? So we're in New York, in Stony Brook, and we're in suits. We're at a conference, and we were going to get something to eat for dinner. The cab driver comes, and we get in the car, and we tell him where we're going, and he says, "Oh, well, let me put in the amount. You're going to have to prepay." We were like, "You prepay a cab?" We are sitting here in suits in the backseat. When have you ever had to prepay a cab? I mean, it turned into the biggest ordeal ever about whether or not we have to prepay a cab. I mean, Dr. Morris was so livid that, and we talked about how these experiences manifest, right? I mean, just ask yourself if you've ever had to prepay for a cab. We're not talking about Lyft. We're not talking about Uber. I mean, we're talking about a local cab driver, right? Where you pay after you get to where you're going. And so these are the type of experience that we have. My most traumatic experience, though, was when I was in college and I was going from Memphis to Murfreesboro, which is in Murfreesboro in Middle Tennessee. And I'm driving across the state, and I got stopped in a construction zone, speeding in a construction zone. And the officer goes, "Oh, okay, I see, that you're in college. You got your books, you got your clothes in the back." He asked me where I was going. I told him, and he said, "Well, unfortunately, since you're speeding in a construction zone in this county, you have to actually go to court." And I was like, "Okay, all right, that sounds normal, I guess." I could tell this story for days, right? One of the most traumatic experiences I've ever had. I go to court for a speeding ticket. The judge, his name was Durwood Moore, I'll never forget, had a tattoo on his arm, found out didn't even have a law degree. See, these are the kind of places we talking about in America. You all just don't realize, right? Didn't even have a law degree, right? And I should say shout out to my one of my closest friends from college, Laura Peverhouse, who is from Dixon County and actually ended up referring a lawyer to me to get out of this situation. Because in short, we go to court and I'm seeing the systematic way that the system works, right? The unjust way the system works. White men were walking up and he would say, "Joe, didn't I tell you not to beat your wife anymore? George, didn't I tell you not to be drinking and driving?" A black person come up for something. "Oh, you stealing? Oh, 90 days in lockup." Right? You doing something else? 120 days in lockup. And I'm like, this is crazy. So I come up and I tell him, I present my case. I'm in a suit. right? I have my transcript where I had a 4.0 in college. He got that transcript and he was like, I don't care about your grades. I mean, it literally made the situation worse, trying to be respectable, right? Because accommodating doesn't work. And so I'm sitting there as a 19-year-old and he says, either you produce the money or you're going to spend 72 hours in prison, in jail. And I was like, in jail for a speeding ticket? I was like, well, I do know due process and I know that I can request a trial. I said, so that's what I want to do. And so he got really upset that I knew that. I had to pay a whole lot of money at this point. I hadn't called my my family, let them know I was trying to be grown, deal with stuff on my own. And so I call them and I'm like, I need some money, like immediately. I tell them what happens. In short, after several month ordeal, my family had to spend about $3,500 to get me out of this speeding ticket, right? And if that wasn't the case, I would have a record right now for something that started over a speeding ticket, right? And so these are the types of situations that we're talking about, right? I mean, I can go into a whole bunch of detail about some of the other details of this case, but again, shout out to Lord Piva House, because great people can come from racist places. And in that regard, her and the lawyer, they were like, look, it's one side of Dixon, it's another side of Dixon, right? And so they were very, very helpful in that. So remember, when you're traveling and you're at a beach or you're at a park or something kind of inherent to nature, remember that black people might not necessarily be there due to structural and interpersonal forms of discrimination that subjugate us and form collective memories of anguish and stress. The scary part, though, is that due to urban sprawl, suburbanization, and gentrification, that these sundown towns have now come closer to the city. They're not just in rural areas in the outskirts. They are literally down the street. So, and neighborhood residents monitor people who come in the neighborhood. Just look at listservs, right? And so while neighborhood residents monitor this, police are actually literally enforcing this and acting as neighborhood border control agents, right? And so this is what traveling while black means. So to conclude, thank you as always for following some of the stuff that we trying to do here. You can follow me on Twitter and Instagram at Sociologist Ray. You can also check out my website, RashawnRay.com. Sign up for a weekly update, which will give you a digest of all the videos that we're putting together. And so just remember, conversations matter like black lives and books.